You think monsters hide under beds? In Belize between 1998 and 2000, they walked in daylight. They watched schoolyards. They stalked quiet streets. And one by one, 5 little girls vanished, only to be found days or months later. Their lives taken in the most brutal, terrifying ways. But the worst part, the killer was never caught. Even with help from the FBI and Scotland Yard, they vanished just like they appeared into thin air. And today, the streets of Belize still whisper his name, the Belize Ripper. Let's uncover this case together, because something about it never made sense. I want you to picture a warm September afternoon in Belize City. Kids walking home from school, neighbors chatting over fences. A normal day until 13-year-old Shirley Nicholas doesn't come home. At first, it feels like a mistake. Maybe she stayed at a friend's house. But hours turn into a night, and the city starts to shift. Shirley's face is posted across walls, markets, and newspapers. Search parties form. People pray. But a month later, her body is found, dumped, stabbed over 40 times. Who could do this and why? It felt like a nightmare, but it was just beginning. As the city mourns Shirley, something even darker starts to take shape. Another name is whispered, Jay Blades, just 9 years old and missing. She had disappeared before Shirley, but wasn't found until 6 months after. Her remains were barely identifiable. And suddenly, Belize realized this wasn't a one-time horror. This was someone targeting children. Let me ask you, how does a small city with tight-knit communities where everyone knows each other not notice a killer in their midst? People started locking their doors. Parents stopped letting their daughters walk alone. Rumors spread like wildfire, but answers were nowhere. And then came the name. The Belize Ripper, a nod to Jack the Ripper, because whoever was behind these crimes was just as cruel. March 23, 1999. 12-year-old Jackie Fern Malik disappears in broad daylight. 2 days later, her body is found. Multiple stab wounds, signs she had been run over by a vehicle. A level of cruelty that shook even seasoned detectives. And here's the chilling part. There was no connection between the girls. Different ages, different neighborhoods, different times of day. It wasn't personal. It was planned, deliberate, calculated. Whoever this was, they were watching, and they were careful. Police ramped up patrols. A curfew was declared, but deep down, everyone knew it wouldn't stop him, because monsters like this don't just stop. June 26, 1999. 8-year-old Erica Wills steps outside to play and never comes back. This time, the city doesn't wait. Search teams are out within hours. Flyers go up. Streets are scanned. Forests combed. The fear has reached a boiling point. People know he's going to strike again. And 3 weeks later, their worst fears are confirmed. Her skeletal remains are found in a remote area. No witnesses, no clear time of death, just a child erased. At this point, Belize isn't just afraid, it's paralyzed. Imagine being a parent knowing someone is hunting little girls and no one has any clue who he is. So here's the question. How does someone keep doing this in a city that's now watching every corner? Who was he? And how was he always one step ahead? By the time the year 2000 arrived, people hoped the worst was over. It had been quiet for months. Maybe the nightmare had ended. But on February 15th, 14-year-old Nomi Hernandez left home and never came back. 9 days later, her body was discovered, mutilated, left in a way that investigators still won't describe in detail. They just say it was the worst scene of all. This wasn't just a pattern anymore, this was a message. And the message was clear. I can take whoever I want, and you'll never find me. People begged for help, and help came, but not in the way they hoped. Because now, even the FBI and Scotland Yard were watching. With 5 girls gone and the killer still roaming free, international pressure built fast. The FBI stepped in. Scotland Yard sent experts. Helicopters scanned the skies. Roadblocks were set up. DNA samples were collected from hundreds of people. But none of it worked. Not a single suspect. No solid witness. No forensic match. The killer had left behind almost nothing. No hair, no fibers, no fingerprints. He was either incredibly lucky or terrifyingly smart. And here's the part that still keeps investigators up at night. What if he wasn't working alone? What if the Belize Ripper was more than just one person? That theory, it's more common than you'd think. Behind closed doors, something changed. Local police overwhelmed. International agents frustrated. But the whispers, they got louder. Some investigators quietly started asking, what if the killer isn't a stranger? Think about it. The girls were all taken quickly, quietly, with no signs of struggle. No loud screams, no public witnesses. Was it someone the victims trusted? A teacher? A neighbor? A police officer? The idea hit Belize like a second wave of panic. Because if the Ripper was one of them, no one was safe. Not in their schools, not in their homes. Looking at the timeline, one thing stands out. The girls weren't taken randomly. There were gaps, months in between. Almost like the killer waited. Why? Was it to stay hidden? Was it part of a ritual? Or was he watching the reaction, feeding off the fear? Here's where things get even more disturbing. All 5 girls were under 15. 4 of them were found in areas close to schools, churches, or remote spots just outside city limits. He knew the city well. He knew where to go. And most chilling of all, he knew when to disappear. It wasn't madness. It was method. With so many eyes on the case, you'd think anything would stick. But every lead crumbled. One man was arrested in connection to Erica Wills, but there wasn't enough evidence. He was released. Another suspect was questioned for Shirley's murder and also cleared. Police even tested DNA from convicted offenders, dozens of them. Still nothing. And then came the terrifying realization. What if the killer had never been arrested before? What if there were no fingerprints because he never made a mistake? And what if this wasn't his first time? Could Belize have missed earlier victims? That's a question no one wanted to answer. After Nomi Hernandez, nothing. No new victims, no new leads, no signs that the killer was even still in the country. It was like he vanished into smoke. The streets stayed quiet but not peaceful, because every silence felt wrong, too quiet, too unnatural, like something was still watching. Families held their daughters close. Some moved away. Others refused to ever speak the Ripper's name again. But the fear never really left. It just went underground, buried under years of unanswered questions. What makes a killer like that stop? Did he leave Belize? Did he get sick? Get caught for something else? Or worse, did he just choose new hunting grounds? By 2001, official efforts had slowed down. Local resources were stretched thin. International help moved on to other cases. And the case of the Belize Ripper was labeled what no one wanted it to be. Cold. That word hit like a punch. Cold means forgotten. Cold means we tried and we failed. But here's the truth. This case was never cold for the families. They kept asking, kept calling, kept waiting for justice that never came. And the deeper I looked into this case, the more I realized something haunting. The real damage wasn't just the loss of life, it was the silence left behind. For over 20 years, the Belize Ripper case remained frozen. But then something happened. In 2022, Belize National Forensic Science Service created a new cold case unit. And one of the first cases they reopened, this one. Why now? Because DNA technology had changed, because databases had expanded, because hope even buried can still grow back. And quietly, the lab began retesting old evidence. What little they had fibers, degraded samples, a few fragments from the crime scenes. It was a long shot, a desperate one. But it was enough to light the fire again. Because if they found a match, this could finally end. And if they didn't, then maybe the Ripper really did win. In that small Belizean lab, a cold case team began a quiet, meticulous process. Old clothing from the victims, tissue samples degraded with time, even the bags their bodies were placed in. Everything was retested using modern tools. And let me tell you, when technology jumps ahead, so does possibility. They looked for what's called touch DNA. Tiny traces left behind, invisible to the eye, but powerful enough to unlock a person's identity. Weeks passed, then months. Samples were cross-checked against global databases from Belize to the United States to Europe. And then the waiting turned into frustration, because not a single match came back. Nothing. No hits. Not even a distant relative. It was like chasing a ghost. So where does that leave Belize? 5 girls, 5 families, and a nation that still can't speak their names without trembling. Even today, there are parents who say they see the Ripper in every stranger's face, in every man who walks too slowly past a schoolyard, in every neighbor who keeps to himself. And here's something heartbreaking. Some people believe the killer is still there, living in Belize, old now, quiet, but alive. Maybe he has a family, a job, a normal life on the surface. It's the kind of thought that rots the inside of a community. Because when a monster walks among you and you never knew, how do you ever feel safe again? Ask anyone who lived in Belize during those years and they'll give you a theory. Some say it was a lone drifter, a man passing through, clever, careful, and gone before anyone noticed. Others think it was someone with power, a man no one dared accuse, someone connected, protected. There's even a theory about a former soldier, someone trained in tracking, evading, and disappearing. But again, no evidence, just stories. But let me ask you, if 5 children were taken in your town and 20 years later no one had answers, would you believe it was random? Or would you believe it was covered up? And if that's true, who is keeping those secrets? Back in the early 2000s, the FBI worked alongside Belizean investigators to create a behavioral profile of the killer. And what they came up with was confusing. They believed the Ripper was male, likely in his 20s or 30s at the time. Intelligent, organized, someone who knew how to move unnoticed, someone who had a reason to watch children but not raise suspicion. Maybe a delivery driver, a church volunteer, a school groundskeeper. But the strangest part, they said the Ripper likely had no prior criminal record. That meant no arrest history, no background flags, nothing to trace. And the scariest thought, if they were right, this person had learned to blend in perfectly. There's one name that keeps popping up when you dig through old reports. A man who was questioned quietly, not charged, and never publicly named. Locals whispered about him, said he gave off a feeling. Said he always lingered around schools, always offered kids candy. He was seen near one of the victims' homes just days before she vanished. But there was no proof, no DNA, no witness willing to testify. He moved away shortly after Nomi's murder. But here's where it gets strange. Years later, he was linked to a separate child abuse case in another country. Still, no charges stuck. And while no one can say he was the Belize Ripper, no one can fully rule him out either. Could he have been the one? Did the Ripper simply slip into another life, in another place? Today, Belize City has changed, but the shadow of the Ripper is still there. Ask anyone who lived through those years, and they'll tell you. The fear wasn't just about the killings, it was about the silence, the helplessness, the way life kept going while 5 girls never got justice. There are murals now, memorials, but no one has stood trial. No confession, no peace. The case is still officially open, but quietly. Investigators admit it's unlikely there will ever be a break unless someone talks, or unless the killer leaves behind new DNA somewhere else. And so the city waits. But the clock keeps ticking. And the Ripper, he may be watching this video right now. Shirley, Jay, Jackie, Arika, Nomi. 5 young lives. 5 stories that never got to unfold. They weren't statistics. They were daughters, sisters, friends. They had dreams of becoming doctors, dancers, travelers, artists. And they were taken. Not in some faraway war zone. Not during some massive national crisis. But quietly, one at a time. In neighborhoods just like yours. And no one ever truly saw it coming until it was too late. What keeps me up at night isn't just what happened to them. It's the idea that someone out there knows everything and still walks free. So now I ask you, what do you think happened? Was it a lone monster, a man who mastered the art of hiding in plain sight? Or was it something deeper, a cover-up, a group, a secret protected for decades? Because someone out there knows the truth. Maybe they were too afraid to speak. Maybe they were too close to the Ripper. Or maybe they were the Ripper. The cold case unit is still active. DNA tech keeps evolving. And the internet never forgets. So if you're watching this and you know anything about those missing years in Belize, you can still come forward. Even now. Because silence is what let him win. And breaking that silence might be the only way to finally stop the Belize Ripper.